Well, then we weren't going to have to worry about losing Robert Jordan, author,
No.
just because this series is gone.
Oh, no. I intend to keep writing.
Good, because we are a selfish people and we like our occasional large chunk of fiction delivered to us so that we can devour it hungrily.
I doubt I will begin writing small or slim.
And we wouldn't want you to, because this is the Robert Jordan that we've enjoyed, and this is the Robert Jordan we look forward to.
Oh, thank you.
And we are out of time. And I want to thank you for coming by here. It's incredibly generous of you, considering this long traveling that you're doing to promote Knife of Dreams, #1 bestseller on the New York Times bestseller list. A wonderful accomplishment. Congratulations
Oh,
again.
thank you.
And thank you for coming.
It's been a pleasure.
You know, the funny thing is, it's not so much about writing, it's about some of the times we got together. Some of the times we did things together. I mean, we met as far away as Australia, yeah. Both went to a convention in Australia and met down there and did some things together. You know, yeah, we became real friends, and we did do things together, and we would visit in Charleston, and they would come up here, and he was a special guy. He was great. I was going to college during the Korean War. You got a deferment while the war was on. When I graduated, I got drafted right away, so I was 2 years in the Army. Now, I never actually got sent out of the country because the war was winding down. But, you know, they paid you $68 a month. Even in those days, that was pretty little. You know, you're starting out as a private, and I sure wasn't planning to make a career out of the Army. My entertainment was reading. I always loved to read, and that's what I did in the Army for all my hours. I ended up in Fort Polk, Louisiana, which is truly the end of the earth. And I had gone through field artillery school, and my official classification in the Army was computer. That was me, I was the computer. And I did my computing on something you guys will maybe not even know what they are. You know what a slide rule is? We did our computing on a slide rule. It's, you know, like rulers that you match different and you compute on them. But I did an awful lot of reading, and when I got out of the Army, I thought, what do I really like? I like books, I like reading. I'm gonna get a job in publishing. So I went looking for a job in publishing, and I went to pocketbooks, because I'd read a lot of pocketbooks. And I was looking for a job in editorial, and they said, hey, you don't have a background for editorial, chemical engineering, but sales is looking for some people. So I said, okay. So I went down, saw the sales manager there, and he said, look, where we're looking for people isn't here, it's Select Magazines. We just signed a contract with them to sell magazine wholesalers for us. They had Lifetime, Reader's Digest, McCall's, Red Book, big magazine distributor. And I'll send you over there with a recommendation. So they hired me, and I became a salesman for them, Boston and North. And there was another salesman in New England. He used to cover all of New England for them, all the wholesalers in New England. But he would have south from Boston, you know, with Connecticut and Rhode Island and good piece of Massachusetts. And I worked for him for about 6 months, and they kept telling me I was doing a great job. And they took me out for a nice lunch, and they laid me off. They said, sorry, kid. We put you on because we took on pocketbooks, which was a great new customer, and we needed another person for New England. But we just lost Condé Nast. I think it was Condé Nast. We just lost a major magazine distributor, publisher, and we can't have two men in New England anymore, and we'll send you on with a nice recommendation. Yeah, great. And my wife had literally told me the week before that she was pregnant. And here I am out of a job.
Yeah.
I went back to Pocket Books and I said, Maury, he was the sales manager who had sent me to Select. I said, Maury, did you like anything I did for you with Select magazines? He said, yeah, kid, you did a good job. We don't have anything quite comparable, but if you'll be an assistant local salesman, there's a job in Philadelphia. So I moved us to Philadelphia, and it was, you know, that's kind of like a stock boy. You fill the racks at the airport. So I did that for about 4 months, and I got promoted. There came an opening for Baltimore, Washington. So I got to be full salesman for Baltimore, Washington.
Yeah.
And I moved there, and that's where my oldest child, Linda, was born. It wasn't too long. I got promoted to regional manager, and I moved up halfway to Philadelphia. I got a neat house on the northern tip, a town called Northeast Maryland. It's on the northeast tip of the Chesapeake Bay. And, you know, I had north to Canada. I didn't go to Canada, but north to the Canadian border and south through North Carolina and west as far as Michigan. And had 17 guys working for me covering magazine wholesalers in those areas. I moved on to Grosset and Dunlap. I got a call one morning from a guy who had been, Harold Roth had been executive vice president of Simon & Schuster. He went to Grosset to be president. And he called me up one morning and he said, hey, Tom, I sure wasn't looking for a job yet. I'd moved up very rapidly and I was enjoying what I was doing. But he called me up and he said, hey, Tom, how'd you like to be a publisher? I couldn't resist. I said, yeah, Harold, that's the name of the game. So I went to Grosset and Dunlap, where I hired Harriet to run the YA line Tempo. And we began doing all those things I talked about over lunch. We began publishing. We published all kinds of things in Tempo. We published a huge number of cartoons. You know, we would reprint all these different cartoon lines and sell them for kids, and we had a classics line, and we did regular novels, but we did enough science fiction and fantasy, and they worked well enough, so they bought us Ace to play with. And our job was to turn Ace around and, you know, make something profitable, and we did. And it just worked out so well that we built the program so well that I had the credibility where I could eventually borrow the money to start Tor. The biggest retailer in Pittsburgh was the department store, Kaufman's. And the Kaufman buyer, I still liked fantasy and science fiction. I read a lot of it. When I was selling it to him, you know, because we were already distributing Ballantine, I was selling their line. Yeah. Simon & Schuster didn't do much of it. But I didn't really know the Ballantines yet or anybody there. You know, I didn't know them until I was their sales manager. I had met Ian once. I had a nice meeting with him, but didn't really know him. Yeah. So anyway, Arthur Bergholz, he was the buyer for Kaufman's. He had a radio show, and he used to invite people on for talk, and he liked science fiction and fantasy too, and somebody he would invite on occasionally was the main reviewer for Astounding Science Fiction, which became Analog Science Fiction. And this guy, you know, signed his name P. Schuyler Miller. Everybody called him Sky. He became a friend, and we would have lunch every so often. And one day we were having lunch, and he hands me this big fat manuscript. And he said, Tom, this is a great book, and it's been all over New York, and nobody wants it. He says, you got to get Simon & Schuster to publish it. I said, well, okay, Sky, I'll take it home, I'll read it, and if I feel the same way you do, I'll push it. So it was the manuscript to Dune. And I read it, I loved it. I sent it in to editorial with a strong letter saying, hey, we really should do this. And, you know, they listened to you a little because you were one of their sales managers and you were selling their books. They didn't really want to antagonize you. They said, yes, we'll read it. But they didn't. They never got around to it. I don't think they ever read it. because, 2 weeks later I still hadn't heard, and I called again, what's happening? Oh, okay, we'll get to it. So then I finally called back again because I never heard. And they said, oh, this big fat book by an unknown author. We don't do much science fiction. No, we can't do that. I said, well, can you at least send me back the manuscript? Yes, but they never did. But it ended up a great break for me because I moved up from the regional in Pittsburgh. The next year I got promoted to sales manager, national field sales manager in New York. And that's when I got to know the Ballantines. And, I got involved in the selling of it at a really good level, knowing the publisher, the owner. He was the owner and publisher. And it just amazed me that they didn't even read Dune when I was pushing it so hard. When I went to ACE, I published the mass market of Dune. And I got to know Frank Herbert, and we became friends. And I often, maybe a dozen times, I went up to visit him at his home. And he lived in Port Townsend, Washington, up on the Olympic Peninsula, way north. And I went up and, I would visit with him and we would have a good time. And I started Tor, of course. I was no longer his publisher and I kind of lost touch. But his son, Brian, had worked with him on a couple of books. And when Frank died, Brian wanted to do prequels. So I began doing the prequels. We've done 17 Dune prequels so far. And they're, nice and successful. But the real neat thing was the audio had never been done. Because back when I was at ACE, they were still on tape. They weren't even on disc. And it took 16 tapes to do Dune, and it cost about 10 times what the book cost. Nobody was buying. So it just didn't get made. And by the time I was starting Tor, they were on disc and people were buying them, buying things like that. But it still hadn't been made. So when I bought the prequels, I bought the rights to the audio of the original Dune. So like last Christmas, it was #1 on the New York Times. This book, I'm so lucky I couldn't get Simon & Schuster to publish it. We started out with a trade paperback because we figured a fat first novel, and it was a first novel under the Robert Jordan name, a fat first novel, it's going to be hard to get enough copies out to make a splash, make a real splash. I mean, here's this unknown guy, we don't have any quotes, So we started out with a trade paperback and we made a big fuss about it. And that was pretty unusual in those days. People didn't really start by trying to promote a trade paperback. Jim Rigney believed in having a brand name for the kind of book he wrote. So for historicals, he picked Reagan O'Neill. But he didn't want his historical brand name being used for fantasy. It was, to him, an entirely different kind of book, and he wanted people to know right away what it was. So he would write under the Robert Jordan name for fantasy. What it meant was we had this guy who had been a paperback bestseller and we couldn't even use it. So he wrote the fantasy, we published it as a trade paperback, and we got out, we sold just over 40,000 copies in the first year, which for a trade paperback launch of an unknown author was darn good. Then on the next book, we a little more than doubled the sale. We were over 80,000 in the first year, net sales. And on the third book, Dragon Reborn, I said to myself, now's the time to go for it in hardcover. And I had a terrible time with our sales department. Macmillan was selling the books for us. And they said, are you crazy? You've more than double the sale from the first book to the second in trade paperback. Why on earth do you want to change and upset your readers. They won't get the same thing. They want to carry. I said, no, it's time for cloth. And it was. We hit the New York Times list. Not very high, but I think it's number 7 or something. But we hit the list with the 3rd book. And from there on, it was always on the list, and the last 7 were number 1. One of the things we did that you wouldn't do today, but when we did the first mass market, you always did your mass market at least a year after the hardcover publishing in those days, or the trade paperback, the first publishing. You waited a year for the low price edition. By this time we knew we had this huge thing that was going to be bigger. And we gave away something like 900,000 books. What we did is, there's a natural breaking point. And again, I'm not sure anymore exactly what that is. I forget where it is. But there's a natural novella in the front of the book, about 10 chapters. Maybe 140 pages out of 800 and some odd, I think the book was. It was a great novella in and of itself, like the novella for Ender's Game. And I thought, we'll give this away, and nobody's going to stop there. If they read this, they're going to want the whole book. And we gave it away in 100-copy. I don't know if you remember them, but we used to have these floor displays, cardboard floor displays for mass market paperbacks. Yeah. And this was thin, so we could put a lot in them. And we gave away 100-copy dumps to Walden and Dalton. We had more book chains than Walden and Dalton and Borders and Barnes and Noble and Books A Million. But we also gave it to Walmart and Target and Kmart. Yeah. And we put out almost 1 million samples. Wow. And I think it was a huge success. They were free. And that's why a lot of chains took them, because they thought, hey, how can we go wrong? It's a good story all by itself, and we're giving it away. Our customers will like this. So it was easy to get these floor displays placed. If you were selling them something, a whole different world, you had to probably pay for placement. But you give them 100 books to give to their customers, why not? Yeah, she called me up one day when she had the manuscript. Up to then I'd read the Fallon books, and I thought they were great historicals, great stories. And she called me up and she said, I don't know, Tom, you got to read this right away. I said, well, how come right away? And she said, well, I don't know if I got the wife thing, or this is as good as I think it is. Yeah. I think this is a truly great book, and you got to read it. And I read it, and I agreed with her. When I read Tolkien, when I was selling Tolkien, and we had this enormous success, and I thought, boy, this is unique. I've never seen a book take off this way, a fantasy book, any book really. I mean, it was huge. I said, gee, to myself, I remember thinking, gee, it's nice to be involved in this. This is a unique event. By the time I got to Dragon Reborn, I said, I was mistaken about that unique part. We got another. We have another special event. This is special just as Lord of the Rings was special. And maybe, I'm prejudiced, of course, maybe more special. And the New York Times would say it too. The New York Times said, Robert Jordan has come to dominate the world. They gave a beautiful long review, but then they said, Robert Jordan has come to dominate the world Tolkien began to reveal. And then the other thing that had happened is public broadcasting happened later, but that makes me think about continuing, how it continues to attract readers. Yeah. Public broadcasting, when they chose the 100 Great American Reads, had the whole 14 books of the Wheel of Time among the 100 Great American Reads. Going all the way back to the beginning, back past Moby Dick, from the very beginning of American publishing, the whole 14 books were part of the 100 Great American Reads.
Wow.
And, you know, what better endorsement could you possibly get? What had happened is Moshe Feder had acquired Atlantis, and he was very enthusiastic about Atlantis, and he got me to read it right away. And I read it, and I thought, yeah, this is really good. When the manuscript from Mistborn came in, I read that right away, and I thought, holy cow, this could be the guy. It happened to be all at the right time when we were looking for somebody to finish the Wheel of Time. And I read Mistborn, and I said, yeah. And I sent it to Harriet with a strong recommendation. And Harriet, Brandon had also written, you know, a lovely kind of goodbye to Jim Rigney when he died. You know, wrote a lovely comment on how special he was, which somebody had forwarded to Harriet, and Harriet really liked it. And so she thought it was kind of neat that I was sending her Mistborn, that this was the guy I was recommending, and she read it, and she felt the same way I did. Jim was saying right to the time he died it was going to be one big fat book. But I had seen his notes. He had done such extensive notes. He'd written scenes, and he'd written notes, and he'd written outlines of where it would go from there. And I thought, I'll be amazed if Brandon can do this in one book. When people see these leatherbounds, they know that the people involved in the publishing truly believe in the work. They're making a statement that isn't normally made on a book. They're taking a risk and putting a lot of money into creating something because they truly believe in it, that they believe this is something that deserves special treatment, that deserves to be passed on. You know, you create this beautiful leather is strong, this beautiful, strong manuscript that people are going to, you know, really care about, and they're going to keep down the years. Read the first 10 chapters. You know, read them in the E if you want, but read, you know, join one of these clubs like Amazon where you can read a piece of a book. And I'm pretty sure if you'll take an hour or two, you'll want to read the whole 14 books, and that'll be a great many hours to go. You'll have an awful lot of fun. Just really sample it.
We're here with Robert Jordan. Welcome back to Fast Forward.
Thank you for having me.
You know, I have to say, first of all, congratulations. I mean, we get a lot of extremely successful authors on this show, many of whom make the bestseller list, but very few of them debut at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list when a book comes out. Very well done.
Thank you. Thank you. It's very nice to happen.
And I'm sure that Mr. Doherty of Tor is extremely happy that it happened too.
Oh yes, he was dancing in the middle of his office.
Well, Knife of Dreams, number 11 in the series of the Wheel of Time as we come closer to the end of the age. And it's really a delightful book. I had a marvelous time reading it. You keep telling people to read and find out. And if they read this book, boy, are they going to find out a lot.